Hi everyone, so in this video we are talking to my farmer friend Sandeep, who tells us about the very integral connection between the soil, the water, irrigation practices, agroforestry in the farm. And for me it was very interesting because this is exactly the connection between why Sadhguru got into Rally for Rivers and then got into Save Soil, and a lot of people were saying that these are two different movements and why is he doing different things like this, and this is the connection because they are actually not different on ground.
Well, let me tell you, like we had two patches in our farm. I think we must have spoken in my farm, podcast. We have different plots of the farm where the soil quality itself is different. We didn't make it uniform. We didn't get soil from anywhere and dump it to make it uniform. And so much so that they're also in different level, which we are using, I said, right? Like we're using it for irrigation without any electricity, just gravitational force. Now, two of my low-lying farm plots had very porous sandy soil. It still has the same kind of soil, but it was so like bad in terms of the porosity that it was so porous. It was nice, the soil, in terms of having sandy soil is good. You have specific type of crops you can grow in that particular soil, but it was so porous because of not having cultivated, not having taken care the right way, that if we water that, there was a small little pond which used to get created in the next farm
Oh
because the
wow.
water just used to seep, and there were underground channels with which it used to just flow out. So that means there was no more water holding capacity at all,
Hmm.
which means it was never grown. Like things like grass, which have root system which are spread out, which are just not going like this, but are like growing just like how the grass grows, right? Like grass, the way it grows on top is the way grass's roots grows on the bottom. So now for a long period of time, we've let it kind of have the cover crops on. So now it has gained some moisture holding capacity. So when we water that patch, there's not a pool which is formed in the next.
Yes, Sandeep, it is interesting you're speaking about the soil losing its water carrying capacity when it's not taken care of with proper planting and stuff, because this the soil videos I wanted to do with related to Save Soil movement by Sadhguru, and earlier few years back he started this whole Rally for Rivers thing and Kaveri calling, which were both about the importance of agroforestry and improving the water table and the river water, which are all very connected because of a very similar reasoning, that first of all you need your trees and stuff to hold your topsoil in place, and that's where the water percolates inside and it carries the water. I mean, obviously the reasoning, like I'm just doing a very verbatim summary job, but they've given a whole reasoning over there. But the point is, what you mentioned is exactly then the point is, then Sadhguru came up with Save Soil, and for a while it was like, what is going on? He was all about river and water, and now he jumped to soil. How is this happening? But then he also at some point mentioned, and I think this was exactly the connection, because he was always trying to talk about this whole thing being connected, the kind of planting and all of that that's happening, the kind of agriculture taking place, water wastage, especially what you also mentioned about flood irrigation versus drip, because that was also leading to some amount of water wastage and all. So it's just interesting you're bringing it, because that was the link, and it took me a while also to link the two up, because otherwise for me it was like, why are these two different eco campaigns taking place? But they weren't exactly different.
Yeah, I mean, look, in nature, they're not. One is going to affect the other. And whatever my focus has been is kind of limited to the few acres of land that we till and what we want to achieve within that, right? Like try to create as much diversity in that ecosystem, small ecosystem as possible. But again, it's not always possible. I cannot create a river stream on my farm, right? Like there's always going to be water flow. I mean, but you got to kind of channelize it. Now there's another way of thinking, okay, saying you shouldn't try to deviate the flow of water from its natural direction, etc., right? But yeah, I still want to, if the water is going to flow through my land, I will. Like, for example, in my own farm as well, the water is kind of brought to a stage where it was getting stagnated. So from there, we kind of created a gradient through the rocky structure. So this is another reason why I think we spoke of as well. Rocky structures are important to make sure that water can flow through them. You know, rocky structures have different uses of it. You know, rocks have better mineral holding capacity than soils do, and slow release. See, because we follow organic farming, everything is about, you know, slow returns, slow impact, etc., right? And rocks are a big part of that, and we use rocks. And our tree, if you see in our farm, our timber based trees are all along the border of the farm. So they kind of make sure that when the water also flows around the border of our farms. We've made sure that water is kind of channelized around the farm and almost kind of creating a moat-like structure to the farm. You know, that to cross the boundary of the farm, you have to cross a, you know, small water flow that kind of exists. So yeah, these are all kind of things which you manipulate. Farming is manipulating, right? Like, you know, in many ways, we are manipulating the natural world to give us what we want. Okay, and it is the choice of each system of farming to what extent we kind of manipulate that, right? Like, there's the whole thing of GMO where you are altering the DNA of the you know, seed itself, so that the generations to come yield one particular type of, you know, crop only. Then there's the other ways of doing this, which is using the nature to manipulate the nature itself, using the rock to manipulate water, using the plant to manipulate soil, using the soil to manipulate the yield. So yeah, organic and natural farming practices, and these are all mixed. Look, I do not subscribe to one school of farming for that matter, like organic, natural, no-till, zero budget, agroforestry, food forest. Even within the school of, you know, without chemical farming, no chemical farming, there is various other classes of these. I do not subscribe to one or the other, but I think just knowing by what it is, there is a little bit of each one of these that we follow in different patches, different seasons, etc. Like, yes, we do follow agroforestry because, you know, it is a multi-cropping between, you know, tomatoes and sitafals. It is a, you know, multi-cropping between my like the spreadable crops like pumpkin and watermelon as well. We're trying to grow some watermelon this time, which is interspersed with plants which grow taller, because watermelons and pumpkins kind of spread on the ground, and they almost become like a, you know, cover crop, although they don't go into roots. Right, so we have a mixed school of aspects across the board. And in terms of having, you know, what you kind of refer to, I read your rally for rivers versus save as soil as two elements, right? Like water and soil. They have connectivity because of the fact that, yes, you got to avoid, you know, erosion. And let me tell you, agroforestry is not actually as much about topsoil. It's actually about, you know, soil erosion deeper as well. The reason why there needs to be plants and larger trees around flowing water is because if they don't exist, the water is going to start creeping into, you know, the soils which are underneath the topsoil as well. Topsoil, the flowing river is not going to touch the topsoil of the next land, right? What it is going to touch is the bottom area where the roots are going down. That is where, when there's a water flowing, the trees start toppling next to them, the pole starts toppling next to them, there is, you know, landfall, you know, next to them. That is because there are no, you know, strong holding roots of the trees around there. So that is more important, and that is why even rock structures are important. That is
Talk
why
about water percolation inside.
Yeah,
But isn't that what helps the water table remain good?
Yeah, so groundwater system is a little more complex, to be very honest. aquifers are what they're called. Basically, aquifers are where waters are held. So if you're digging for a borewell, what you're trying to find is an aquifer. And sometimes it's a pool or aquifer, which means it's kind of collected in stagnant water. So, it's basically super saturated porous rock. You never find, water where there is no rocks. When it is super sandy soil, porous, like what I was mentioning, right? A couple of plots on my farm, you will not find water there because the water just seeps through and flows to the, next
Nearby
possible
patches,
aquifer that might be there. And however deep, this is true to deep more, earth that exists as well. Aquifers are always super saturated rocks. So and when there is rock structures, as much as the rock in itself doesn't absorb water as much as the soil does, rocks are a channeling system. Rocks have crevices and cracks which channel water. That is why I use the rock structures in my farm to have a stream kind of created, right? So because there the water doesn't get absorbed, it flows. And that way, and in my farm, on top of the surface, the water flows horizontally. In the groundwater systems, it basically flows, vertically down as well. So that is why it is important to have, an aquifer creating ecosystem. You cannot control it as much. And that is why I said not all of these practices that I'm speaking of is to kind of influence it the right way, but you cannot control groundwater movement. There is no science to finding where the water can be available, how long the water can be available.
That is true, but at the end, you as you mentioned, you do need certain components to be in place.
Absolutely, yes. That is what you kind of do. And you got to kind of know, not just believe, know that doing the right things in a whole ecosystem at a scale, right? Like, we're not talking of like digging a well next to your 1,000 square feet home. We're talking of farming ecosystems of
as a whole,
thousands of square kilometers of land. And if the practices are followed right across the board, there's fair proof in the pudding that your groundwater systems are going to be recharged, your groundwater systems are going to come up, and you will have enough to sustain for good practices of farming. And that is what these are kind of interconnected again, right? Like flood irrigation makes your water flow away. Your stagnant irrigation helps you. Drip irrigation, stagnant irrigation, even sprinkler based irrigations are good because they help you seep vertically down, which increases the chances of your groundwater being recharged. And rocks are a big part of that.